Well, thank you everyone for coming at the end of a busy day to hear about the little science surrounding the drug naloxone. You'll find out more than you wanted to know about it from a lawyer's point of view, and also a bit about opioids. And you can't turn on the news or open a newspaper or look at the internet without hearing something about the opioid epidemic. And I'll go over exactly what the issues are with that and try to lead it back to your practice, right? Because that's why you're here. You're not here because you want to, take up a hobby in toxicology. You're here because you want to see what you can apply science-wise to your cases. So a little bit of background on me. I'm Dr. Allison Muller. I've been a toxicologist for 23 years here in Philadelphia. I like to say I retired after almost 20 years at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I do work full-time. I have my own consulting practice. I do medical education and medical writing for physicians and pharmacists. And then I also provide expert witness services to attorneys specifically in the area of toxicology. So the kind of cases that I've been exposed to in the legal world that prompted me to put together this talk are things like cases involving medical malpractice and the use of opioids. And I'll go into more detail of how do I know an opioid by name or by trade or what are they exactly. Things about dosing. Dosing is always tricky with all drugs, but especially with opioids, because maybe the opioid dose that I get is not the opioid dose that you should get, because maybe you're used to those type of drugs and I'm not, or vice versa, or we have different medical histories. Dispensing errors at pharmacies involving these drugs. I've been involved in cases with that. And then more and more cases that are post-mortem, meaning after the person has died, trying to piece together what happened and how was an opioid involved or not involved in the death. And a lot of times these deaths are surrounding heroin use and then other drug abuse situations. So for goals of my talk today, to explain how naloxone works, what it is, what it does. You will hear about it in the news if you haven't heard about it already, and I'll explain why that is in detail because of the legislation that has been coming through in various states over the years, and then what those specific laws are. Now, it's not for me as a toxicologist to interpret these laws, it's more to bring to your attention that they exist and then the science behind them. And then finally, the types of naloxone that are out there and kind of my story about how I determined if things are really working well in Pennsylvania when it comes to people being able to get this life-saving antidote. That's indeed what naloxone is, a life-saving antidote for opioid overdose or opioid toxicity. So just a little bit of nomenclature first, because I don't want anyone to be confused and I want you to be educated about the different terms that I'll use. So this is a picture of an opium poppy. And so opiates are drugs that are derived from the opium poppy, so things like morphine and codeine. So people say to me, oh, I'm taking this drug, supplement, whatever, it's natural, it must be safe. Hey, guess what? Morphine is natural too, because it's from the opium poppy, and how safe is that necessarily? So that's an opiate, so that's a naturally derived product. Then there's opioids, which are semi-synthetic or synthetic drugs that hit the same receptors as these opiates from the poppy plant. So semi-synthetic things like heroin or oxycodone or hydrocodone, so heroin being an illegal opioid and heroin being a Schedule 1, and hydrocodone and oxycodone being things that you can get at your pharmacy. They're Schedule 2 or Schedule 3. And then totally synthetic opioids like fentanyl or buprenorphine. But for the sake of nomenclature and keeping it simple, everything's going to be referred to as opioids, whether they be from this natural poppy plant or they're semi-synthetic or synthetic. So I've given similar talks to healthcare professionals about this, and I thought I will keep it to a minimum in terms of mechanism of action or making anything too, high-level scientific. But this is a very simple diagram because it's really a very simple mechanism of how opioids work in the body. So here we have opioid receptors in the brain, and really opioid receptors are all over the body. They're not only in the brain, they're in the gastrointestinal tract, spinal cord, other organs. And then opioids simply attach to these receptors that are in the body to perform their action. So first of all, you're thinking, okay, were we born with opioid receptors knowing that there was going to be opioid drugs available? No, we're born with opioid receptors in our body because we have something called endogenous opioids, which are like the feel-good neurotransmitters, things like endorphins. So we have naturally occurring opioids, and the problem when somebody is, let's say, using an opioid outside, like using heroin or using oxycodone excessively, is that eventually we're going to stop producing our own endogenous opioids. So then when they stop using that outside drug, what happens? They get these awful withdrawal symptoms, and that's part of the reason because they no longer have their feel-good endorphins then hitting their internal opioid receptors. But to go back to the simple diagram, so opioids attach to these receptors and they reduce the perception of pain, right? That's what people are taking these, at least prescription opioids for. Again, things like codeine or morphine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, and then illegal opioids like heroin. But there's not always one action of a drug, as you know. So not only do opioids reduce the perception of pain and give a sense of well-being, but they do some things that we don't want them to do. Things like they slow the action of the motility of the movement in the gastrointestinal tract. They slow respirations, they slow breathing, they can cause some mental confusion, they can cause some upset stomach. So there's not only the benefits, those are a lot of the issues that we have when it comes to opioid toxicity. So you'll see different statistics, and this is the most complete set of statistics, although it is a few years old, back from 2012, in terms of getting a handle on, all right, we keep hearing about an opioid epidemic, like how bad is it? What are we really thinking? What are we trying to picture in terms of how many prescriptions are being written for these opioid painkillers? So in 2012, there were 259 million prescriptions written for opioid painkillers, according to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. And so the way the CDC illustrated this, that means that every adult in the United States would essentially have their own bottle of pills. So that's a lot. That's a huge amount. Every single adult would have their own bottle of pills if that was the amount that was being written. And that doesn't include the illegal use of these prescription painkillers that are sold on the street. And interestingly enough, the CDC also looked at which states were prescribing or had the most written prescriptions for these drugs. The highest prescribing state was Alabama. Actually, most of the highest prescribing states were in the South, and the lowest was in Hawaii. And so they looked at what does that mean? Does that mean like there's more people in pain in the South, and there's health status of the people in the South are worse than in other areas of the country? They didn't find that. So interesting, but not able to tie it to anything specific. Then we have another statistic, 2.1 million Americans develop substance abuse disorders related to prescription opioid pain relievers. So this isn't in regards to heroin, this is specifically for prescription opioid pain relievers. And then almost 500,000 were addicted to heroin back in 2012. And that number continues to grow and continues to be followed by various organizations. Also being followed are the overdose death rates in the United States regarding opioids. So pay attention to two of these lines. So the red line is opioid pain relievers, and you can see from 2001 to 2014 there was quite an increase, almost a 3.5-fold increase in the total number of deaths from opioid pain relievers. Then you'll see the third line down, which is the royal blue line. There was a 6-fold increase in the total number of deaths from use of heroin, and I'll go into a minute why we think this is happening with heroin in particular. So just of interest, this is not a talk on cocaine, but I'll call it out anyway since it's on here. Cocaine kind of is spiked a little bit, 05, 06, but has remained fairly constant in terms of the number of deaths related to cocaine. And I won't get into my feelings or yours about medical marijuana or legalizing marijuana, but marijuana is the green line at the bottom, and look how many deaths were related to that. 0. So why is there an increase in heroin-related deaths? Well, simply there are more people using heroin. That certainly is the case, as we've seen. But also, it's just an increase in availability of heroin. I mean, prescription painkillers are expensive. They're expensive to get on the street. So if somebody is addicted to prescription painkillers, it's cheaper for them to switch over to heroin than to continue on those. That's one of the reasons. And then the loss of tolerance. And so in other words, if somebody's using heroin on a regular basis, and then if they may be in a detox program or what have you, and they stop using heroin for even a short period of time, they lose their tolerance, meaning that high dose that they're able to tolerate without having all their other problems associated with it, like the decreased respirations or the mental confusion. They don't have that. But then if they go cold turkey for a little while, they lose that tolerance. If they go back to that high dose that they were tolerating when they were using regularly, that can result in overdose and death as well. One of the things the CDC has called out in its guidelines regarding opioid use is that they should not be combined with other drugs that decrease the central nervous system. Meaning, if you have a drug like, let's say, oxycodone, that's causing some degree of effect on the central nervous system, and it's depressing it. So not only to become drowsy and possibly confused and the respiration gets slowed, but if they have another drug on top of that, let's say something like Valium, what we call a benzodiazepine, that's known to intensify that effect. So that therefore can lead to toxicity and possibly death when combined. And then let's face it, heroin is something that is not a prescription drug. It's not regulated by anybody. You're buying heroin in the street, even though there's, these brands of heroin, so to speak. So if you purchase, hit of heroin, if you're a regular user, you're like, okay, I want the packet that has like Batman stamped on it, or I want the one that has, the star stamped on it, or what have you, and it's like essentially a brand. But these are being made by, people that are, pharmaceutical dealers on the street corner. So even though somebody might be used to a particular brand, quote unquote, of heroin, they all of a sudden get either a different mixture or a different brand altogether, and they don't know what kind of potency to expect. So when I say potency, sometimes it's cut with something either intentionally or unintentionally to give them more bang for their buck. Sometimes the heroin users are seeking that because they want that. A lot of times it's something like fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than heroin. But they have to make sure that they're in the know. And how are they going to know how much fentanyl is in the heroin hit that they purchase? And fentanyl is one of those opioids that it works very quickly. It goes into the brain almost immediately, and that's one of those opioids that can cause immediate death. And then there's various other things that heroin has been cut with recently, both foreign and drugs that are American made, and the addicts are not expecting it, obviously. So I already mentioned two sources of opioids, so the prescription opioid pain relievers and heroin. What about some other sources of these drugs? So there's things that are partial agonists, something like buprenorphine, and buprenorphine is used for pain. It is a partial agonist, and that means that it hits those receptors, and it sits in those receptors, and it activates opioid receptors, but it also has somewhat of an antagonistic effect in that it's going to have a ceiling effect. So you can only dose yourself so high with buprenorphine before you reach the ceiling effect. That's the nice part about buprenorphine. Sometimes that drug is combined with naloxone, which we'll get into in a few slides. Naloxone being an antagonist for those opioid receptors, and I have an illustration to show you what that does exactly. And these are used, not only buprenorphine is used sometimes for pain, but it's also used for opioid substitution therapy, meaning somebody who is trying to kick the habit of an opioid addiction will be given something like buprenorphine because they're still getting their opioid receptors tapped by an opioid agonist, but at the same time, they have that ceiling effect, so they can't get the high that they want to get. Methadone is something that hits the opioid receptors fully. However, it doesn't have that same euphoric effect that something like heroin would have unless they get a larger dose of it. So kind of the dose makes the high for sure with methadone. And these last three are very interesting, and you may or may not have heard about some of these in the lay press. And 2 out of the 3 are over the counter, and 2 out of the 3 are antidiarrheal agents. So we'll start with diphenolate, which is one of the 2 components of the prescription drug for diarrhea known as Lamodal. So the active ingredient, there's two ingredients, but the active opioid ingredient in Lomotil is known as diphenoxylate, and it has a similarity to another potent pain drug called meperidine. When it's taken in the pill form, it's supposed to go right to the gastrointestinal tract to treat the diarrhea, but it doesn't go into the brain that easily. In other words, it's not meant to give pain relief, it's meant to slow down the gastrointestinal tract from everything moving too quickly. But the dose makes the poison with that one as well, so large doses of this diphenoxylate found in Lomotil can give a high. And we say large doses, so somebody's taking it for diarrhea, they're taking 1 or 2 every few hours, 1 or 2 tablets every few hours, but somebody who's trying to get high off of diphenoxylate is taking like 60 pills in a pop, so that's a massive amount. And speaking of massive amounts and antidiarrheals, there's an over-the-counter agent, meaning you don't need a prescription to purchase loperamide, brand name Imodium, another agent that it is related somewhat to opioids structurally. It does not pass into the brain very easily at all. Again, it's supposed to just work in the gastrointestinal tract, take it in appropriate doses. But if you take a large amount of loperamide, of the Imodium, it does cross into the brain and it does give a high. Unfortunately, the large doses also result in not only a high, but in the case of loperamide, also effects on the heart, to the effect that now the heart's not beating properly because there's so much loperamide on board, and can result in fatal, what we call heart arrhythmias, meaning beats that are just off, and somewhat hard to reverse. So, kind of the cases we've had in toxicology where the toxicologist would, bring, okay, this is the case that I was consulted on this week or whatever. They said, yeah, well, somebody came to Costco and they went in and they purchased, 45 boxes of, this over-the-counter loperamide, and nobody says anything. Like nowadays, if you see, you can't even do this anymore. You can't buy more, you can't even buy 1 box of Sudafed anymore without, showing your license and signing, because the Sudafed was being used to, produce illegal amphetamines. But with the loperamide, it remains to be seen if there'll be any regulations on that, because now people are using this as a heroin substitute. Granted, they have their own problems if they're using a lot of it, because not only are they putting themselves at risk for a nice block in their gastrointestinal tract, but also heart arrhythmias as well. And then finally, another over-the-counter agent known as dextromethorphan. So you'll hear of like a cough syrup, Robitussin DM. DM stands for dextromethorphan. So it's a cough suppressant that's structurally similar to an opioid, obviously not that potent or wouldn't be over the counter, and it's very complex. On one hand, it's known as the poor man's PCP, PCP being angel dust, so it can give like a kind of dissociative high, but it also can kind of give some opioid effects as well. So I mentioned that it's the issue with opioids and the toxicity is once they cross into the brain. And so, in the movies you'll see, somebody with a heroin overdose, and as soon as they shoot up, they drop over dead type thing. But that's typically not what happens, especially with something like heroin. It's usually over a slow death over the course of a few hours as the body is responding to the decreased breathing and not being able to blow off that carbon dioxide, and the oxygen levels are falling until the patient ends up in cardiopulmonary arrest. But if it's something that's potent, like if there was heroin with fentanyl, that might be an immediate death, because the fentanyl just passes over into the brain so quickly and is so potent. So these are the kinds of patient information cards that are going out to the public and also to police officers and other law enforcement to be able to recognize the signs of a patient being poisoned by opioids. They keep it very, very simple. Patient might have one of these, all of these, some of these, but I mean, usually the case is you see the needle, you see the bottle, you see the powder, and that kind of thing. But when we talk about naloxone, one of the things about naloxone being an antidote to reverse all these toxic symptoms is people being able to recognize to begin with, when would we even use naloxone? How do I know if somebody is poisoned or is overdosed? And when I say overdose, it doesn't have to be, the person who chugs, 15 pills of their Percocet and then locks themselves in the bathroom, or the heroin addict. I mean, this could be somebody who is, let's say, hospitalized, and this is like a case that I've been involved in or similar. Somebody's in the hospital and they're getting, maybe it's IV, maybe it's oral, pain medications in the opioid family. The healthcare team isn't quite clear on, is the patient somebody who can tolerate a high dose of opioids? What's their history of using opioids? What's the best dose for them? What's the safe dose? And the next thing you know, they have extreme respiratory depression or cardiopulmonary arrest from it. So for opioid overdoses, in terms of the abuse situation, there's been attempts from a public health standpoint to try and address this issue. And of course, the war on drugs has been going on since the 70s, with millions of people being incarcerated for drug offenses and, billions of dollars being spent on narcotics enforcement. But the issue is, what's really going to be the solution to the problem, and we're still exploring that in terms of a public health issue. The issue is, well, these people who are being incarcerated for drug use, are they going to come out and use again? What kind of treatment can they get? And the issue is, too, drugs are more available and cheaper on the street than ever before. So some examples of how we're addressing this as a country, one would be Good Samaritan Laws. So Good Samaritan Laws in terms of helping overdose victims and those in the scene not being fearful of prosecution for either possession of illegal drugs or drug paraphernalia. Things like prescription monitoring programs. So if I go into a pharmacy and I have a prescription for Percocet, they know that I went down the street last week and had a prescription for Percocet at the other pharmacy, even though I paid cash. So it's not a matter of, if you're on a third-party prescription plan, you have prescription insurance, that's how they're tracking it. States have prescription drug monitoring programs for controlled substances, so pharmacies can see this. I remember when I worked in a pharmacy, when I was in pharmacy school, that was the thing, like, we would call each other, be like, oh, did you get John Smith with a prescription for Valium again? Yeah, he came in again. So it was, kind of like the pharmacists all kind of talking to each other. Now it's much more sophisticated with prescription drug monitoring programs on the pharmacy level. Some states even share information, so it might not be limited to just one state. There might be also exchanging that information with pharmacies in other states, which is very helpful. And, there's different feelings about some of these other type of modalities, things like supervised injection facilities, in the hope that, these people are going to still do IV drugs, let's teach them how to do it safely, let's teach them, to make sure that they use new needles, not sharing needles, and also, bring them to a place where they can also be educated about receiving drug treatment to even kick the habit altogether. So that supervised injection facilities and also needle exchange programs. And then finally, safe prescribing education. So physicians who are prescribing opioids, being able to have a dialogue with the patient about, this is the agreement that we have in terms of how often you're going to come see me. You're going to do urine drug testing because I want to see if you're also doing other drugs. So they'll get a urine drug screen when the patient comes back, for their evaluation. Let's say they're chronically getting oxycodone for, let's say, chronic back pain. So they'd be getting urine drug tests. Now they're not able to measure, they're taking the dose of Percocet or oxycodone that I gave them, but they're able to see, wait a minute, they're not even showing up positive. What are they doing with their Percocet? Are they selling it? What are they doing with it? Or they're showing up positive for their opioid, their Percocet, their oxycodone, but now I see they're also doing cocaine and they have THC on board. So that's a signal then to the provider that this may be a person that's at risk for serious addiction. So there's different programs in place to try and address, and it's ongoing to see which ones are really successful and which ones not. And finally, when it comes to preventing overdose with opioids, there is Naloxone. And so, I would give a little bit of a preview to Naloxone being an opioid antagonist, preventing the binding of any opioid to the opioid receptors, and I'll have a diagram of that in a moment. So there's two types of opioid antagonists. I just want to compare them in case you do hear also of naltrexone. So naloxone has been FDA approved since 1971, for the treatment of opioid overdose. It can be given many different ways, meaning many different routes of administration, except by mouth. So there's no such thing as naloxone pills, because naloxone, what happens is it does not get absorbed by the body if it is taken and it ends up in the stomach. So it has to be given either intravenously, shot into the muscle, given a little bit under the skin with a small needle, or sprayed up the nose just like a regular nasal spray. The good thing about naloxone as an antidote to opioid toxicity is that it's quick. You don't have all day. I mean, I realize I said it takes a few hours for death to ensue with your typical opioid toxicity. However, there is the case where you don't want the patient to have decreased respirations either. So you want to get it to the patient as quickly as possible to reverse the toxicity. So depending on the route of administration of naloxone, it might be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and for the intranasal form a little bit longer. The data show up to 13 minutes at the longest. And it doesn't last forever, meaning once it kicks the opioid off of the opioid receptor, naloxone doesn't reverse the effects forever, only about anywhere from a half an hour to maybe an hour, hour and a half. So what is part of the training, especially for law enforcement and for those in the community, is that it's not a one and done type thing. So somebody exhibits toxicity from a heroin overdose and a police officer administers naloxone, and then the person, may or may not have some withdrawal symptoms, but they're better, they're breathing, they're getting up, they're walking around. That doesn't mean that they're done and now they don't need to go to the hospital, because they very well may need a second dose. As opposed to the other type of opioid antagonist known as naltrexone. So naltrexone is not meant for that. Naltrexone is more used for alcohol and opioid dependence over a long period of time. It's not an emergent drug because it takes an hour to 2 hours to work. That's not fast enough. It's nice that it lasts a long time. That's a nice piece of it, but it's just not a drug that works quickly enough for our purposes when it comes to opioid overdose. So here's the same diagram that we had all the way in the beginning of the talk, but this is showing how naloxone competitively inhibits the action of opioids. And what that simply means is it kicks opioids off of the opioid receptors and it sits there instead, blocking their action, because the receptors like naloxone better than they like opioids. So this is something that, again, does not last forever, and it may just be a half an hour to an hour and a half of this competition between the two. So just to give you some highlights about what the naloxone products are that are out there. So I want to also stress that naloxone is a prescription drug. However, we go into some of the legal pieces of naloxone access. Naloxone in Pennsylvania is, as in every state, is prescription. However, if I wanted to get naloxone, either because I regularly use opioids, or I have a family member or a neighbor or a friend or whatever, and I know they regularly use opioids, either they're chronically using it on a legitimate basis for pain and I just want to have it, or I know they have a known heroin habit and I just want to have it in case of emergency, I can walk into a pharmacy and ask to buy naloxone, and the pharmacist will sell it to me. They're supposed to sell me 2 doses. And he'll sell 2 doses because, remember, it doesn't last all that long. So I did kind of like, toxicologist hits the street in real life type thing, and I went to 2 pharmacies out by where my office is, and I went to the first pharmacy and I asked just that. I didn't introduce myself. I just, went up to the person at the counter in the pharmacy and said I would like to purchase naloxone. And she was, I'm not sure what that is. So she got the pharmacist came out, and she said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I wanted to purchase naloxone. And she says, you have a prescription? And I said, no. And she goes, well, that's a prescription drug. I said, I realize that. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm not going to play guess what I'm thinking. So I said, I introduced myself and why I was doing this. She goes, yeah, you need a prescription. And I said, actually, I don't. I said, there's a standing order in Pennsylvania, set up by State Board of Pharmacy with other boards, and the standing order says I can come in, and based on that standing order, I can purchase it. And yes, it's a prescription, but I don't need a prescription. She wouldn't sell it to me. Okay, so I go to the next pharmacy. The next pharmacy, more than happy to sell it to me, but they'd only sell me 1 dose. Well, you have to sell me 2 doses. No, you only get 1 dose. No, you're supposed to sell me 2 doses. And then there was some confusion about, oh, we can't give you the needles with that. What am I supposed to do with like this intramuscular form of naloxone? Oh, you need the prescription for the needles. How am I going to use this? I can't like have somebody drink it, you know. So there's a lot of miscommunication, still some kinks to be worked out. I don't mean to pick on Pennsylvania, but since I was in Pennsylvania, I thought I would do the experiment. So the cost of these naloxone formulations varies a lot. So there's a very kind of user-friendly, very interesting, I have the placebo of it, I've yet to try it out, meaning there's no drug, but it does everything else, called Evzio. And Evzio is an auto-injector, so real easy to use, and it talks you through it. It has a voice, and it says what you need to do exactly in terms of injecting it. Super expensive. Each dose is about $2,200. So if I'm going into the pharmacy and I want to buy my needed 2 doses, it's $4,400. And you know, the question is, does insurance pay for that? Well, I guess it depends what kind of insurance you have. There's much cheaper formulations out there. The one that I was referring to that I use the needles for, there's intramuscular, and you can just buy the generic of it and with the vials. Then there's the nasal spray, all the way to the right. The brand name is Narcan, and that's the easiest one. I mean, if you're not a healthcare provider, how comfortable are you, giving intramuscular injections? They're not hard, but it's not necessarily comfortable for somebody. The dosing varies quite a bit, even between the 2 forms of the intranasal forms of naloxone. If they're kind of, making it themselves versus getting the brand name with the nasal spray already put together, the dose is twice as much. But the thing is with naloxone is a very safe drug. You can't say that about all drugs. There's very few serious reactions that we see with it. What we sometimes find, though, with naloxone, and you can imagine if somebody, and I had a conversation with a police officer about this, if you are giving somebody naloxone and you're now taking away their high, whether it be from heroin, oxycodone, codeine, morphine, whatever, they're not going to be happy. They're going to be agitated, they're going to be kicking, screaming, maybe vomiting, maybe lots of stuff coming out of their eyes. I mean, just everything kind of just going in all different directions. And so for police officers, then the issue is, are you going to give this to somebody if you're by yourself, like you don't have a partner? Not all police officers have a partner. So that's the one downside of naloxone. The withdrawal from an opioid, though, unlike some other drugs, is not life-threatening. Uncomfortable, yes. Aggravating for the people trying to take care of them in the field, yes, but not life-threatening. On the other hand, though, opioid toxicity certainly is life-threatening. So to have an antidote like this and put it in the hands of people in the community and law enforcement, when the day that it was only available to EMS or only available to people in the hospital setting, getting it out there for people to have and to use and to learn how to use it safely. So I said it's something that works pretty quickly, which is good, and it's very safe and well tolerated. The withdrawal can be an issue. The most common adverse effect, and I'm getting that piece of data from something called a package insert. So every prescription drug in the U.S. has something called a package insert, and that's something that is an FDA mandated document that the pharmaceutical manufacturers keep up to date. So that doesn't sound so bad, does it? Of course, there's always serious but rare adverse effects, and you may hear this or come across this if you've had, let's say, a case that involves a patient that may or may not have an adverse reaction after receiving naloxone. It's not common, but there's certainly the issue of possible cardiac arrhythmias, meaning heartbeat's gone wrong, pulmonary edema, meaning the lungs have too much fluid in there, or the breakdown of muscle tissue and kind of clogging up the kidneys, something called rhabdomyolysis. So those are things that are found in the literature regarding serious adverse effects with naloxone. Not common at all, considered fairly rare, not enough to say, gee, we shouldn't be putting the naloxone in the hands of community members because of these events. They're very, very unusual. Now, one thing I didn't mention about naloxone other than the withdrawal is that it sometimes can mask toxicity from other drugs like cocaine. So sometimes the only thing that's chilling out somebody from their cocaine use is the heroin that they've also used. So now if you've lifted that heroin, now all of a sudden you can see the effects of cocaine, which may make them somewhat combative. So some states, before they allow those in the community, including law enforcement, to obtain naloxone, they have to go through something called an opioid overdose prevention program. And those programs vary in terms of length and content, and may or may not go through basic rescue measures. But the one thing that's very important about those programs is that they stress, even if the patient is given the naloxone, that's not the end of the story. They still need to call 911. They still need EMS and to be taken to an emergency department. Now, some states have implemented unique programs. So in North Carolina, in 2011, there was this program called Project Lazarus in one particular county in North Carolina, where for every prescription opioid that was dispensed, you got naloxone with it. I don't think it was a free naloxone, but you got naloxone with it. So it's automatic. So you pick up your prescription for OxyContin, you also get naloxone with it. Here it's one big package, and they give you some information about why you need naloxone. That's a long discussion though, because imagine like you're going there and you're, for your back pain or hip pain or whatever, and you're getting your prescription, you're not expecting a second prescription. Well, in this county, in Wilkes County, North Carolina, that's what they were doing. So what they found was they had an 82% decrease in deaths that year in terms of opioid toxicity. So it was successful. It was a successful program, and not a single resident died that year from opioid overdose, at least from prescription opioid overdose. I mean, heroin dealers were not giving you a complimentary bottle of naloxone. And so overdose education and naloxone distribution programs have been looked at in terms of, okay, how effective is it to put naloxone in the hands of people out there in the community or law enforcement? So the Maryland Poison Center did a retrospective study, meaning they looked at the information after it had already occurred, so looking backwards. They would ask people who were involved in giving people naloxone in the community to call within 2 hours of giving it and tell them what happened. Was there any effect? Did you have to give more than one dose? What exactly? There wasn't a lot of data for 16 months. It was 78 instances reported. But the rate of opioid reversal was over 75%, which is great. That means that one, people were correctly recognizing opioid toxicity, and number two, they were providing the appropriate number of doses of naloxone, whether that be one dose or two doses. So the concerns with these programs in terms of giving naloxone to those in the community, so, I mean, you can imagine if somebody is on the scene of a heroin overdose, they might be using themselves, they might have drug paraphernalia. The last thing they're thinking about is, okay, I know this person just overdosed, but if I call, then I'm going to be here, or they're going to trace the call, and now I'm implicated in having drug paraphernalia, illegal drugs, that kind of thing. And so these Good Samaritan laws may apply to that bystander, giving them some degree of immunity, or it also may apply to the user themselves. Other concerns that people have with these community naloxone programs is that, people will get the naloxone and they're like, okay, we're done. I'm not going to go to the hospital now. I'm better. I'm not on the ground, gasping for breath anymore. I'm fine. Or the other concern is, because it can be rather uncomfortable, an understatement, of people having withdrawal following naloxone use, that they just shoot up more heroin. It's like, I don't want to go through this withdrawal, I'm going to have more heroin. Then they can overshoot and end up with toxicity in itself. So this is the meat of the legal aspects for you. And again, as a toxicologist, I just want to highlight this for you, but this is something for you to think about. So the third-party prescribing laws are one set of laws, and it varies by state in terms of waiving the requirement of having the prescription in the name of the person who is going to actually receive the drug. So if I have a family member that I know may be at risk for opioid toxicity, they're a heroin addict or they're using chronic opioids on a prescription basis, I can get a prescription from my doctor in my name, but use it for somebody else. So that's what third-party prescribing is. Standing order laws is what I described we have in Pennsylvania, that there is a body at the state level that has authorized all pharmacies to be able to provide the prescription drug naloxone under the standing order without somebody walking in there with a prescription of any kind. There's also these Good Samaritan Laws, which I discussed also, in terms of people getting some degree of immunity, either as the bystander or the actual user themselves. And so this chart will mean more to you than it means to me, but I thought it would be of interest in terms of the different types of immunity that are given to those who prescribe naloxone, ranging from the civil to criminal to disciplinary level, and also to dispensers and those who are administering it. So where are we with these laws that are supporting naloxone in the hands of those who are not healthcare providers? So all but 3 states, so Kansas, Montana, and Wyoming, are the only 3 states in the country that don't have some type of naloxone access law. They don't have a Good Samaritan law related to naloxone, or they don't have a naloxone access law. 36 states have some sort of Good Samaritan law as of last year, as of July 2016, and in 2010 there were only 4. So in 6 years we went from 4 states to 36 states having some kind of Good Samaritan law. So this just shows that really all states except for those 3 that I mentioned have some sort of naloxone access law trying to promote getting this antidote in the hands of those in the community. So another law that's related to naloxone in the community is something called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act of 2016, also known as Rowdies Law, and it's promoting federal funding for programs on a statewide level to allow pharmacists specifically to dispense naloxone without a physician's prescription. Remember, not all states have a standing order. So this is just a law that's really promoting it from a financial standpoint. And you will see these headlines, and I always get questions about this, that, naloxone's now over the counter. So naloxone is still a prescription drug, it's just a matter of, is there a standing order at some level, either with a local physician practice or at a statewide level, to be able to get this life-saving prescription drug without having a paper prescription in hand. And this is another kind of educational piece that's put out to really educate folks on what does an opioid overdose look like, and what do they do. And this is something out of New York State, trying to educate those about opioid overdose. So just to sum things up, and I want to hear what your questions are, thinking through some of maybe the cases that you've had or are currently working with, that naloxone as an antidote is safe. There is certainly possibility for rare but very serious adverse effects, so something to think about from a medical malpractice standpoint, safety standpoint. Also that there's community use and laws that are expanding access to naloxone, but just handing it out without any education is not helping anyone. And then we really are kind of still looking at data like, is this really a significant answer to the problem of the opioid overdose epidemic? So in thinking through some cases that you've had, think about what made you interested in coming to the CLE, late in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I'll open the floor up for any questions that you may all have. Yes?
I haven't heard about this stuff in the past year. How did the publicity get launched?
That's a good question. I'm not sure where it all started or how it all started. I mean, we hear about it when somebody, in popular culture, like Prince with the fentanyl overdose, or Michael Jackson with the opioid overdose and the, overuse and overprescribing and inappropriate use. That certainly increases the level of awareness right there. But how it all started from the very beginning, that's a very interesting question, and I wish I had an answer to that.
Since what is the name, how do you pronounce it again?
Naloxone, you're correct.
Naloxone, since it's a saving drug, why do you have to have a prescription for it? And how do you get a prescription for something like that? I mean, do you have to know somebody who's using heroin or something? I mean, I don't understand.
So I'll
all that
answer both
regulation.
of your questions. So the first question is, why is it a prescription drug? It started out as a prescription drug in the 70s, and it's really a financial issue. It's a drug that is off patent, so it's not a brand name drug exclusively anymore. So for companies to go through the time and expense, it's not just they can say, okay, I'm going to now sell it over the counter. It's a lengthy, expensive process for them to make a prescription drug an over-the-counter drug. So that's why it's still a prescription drug. Not necessarily because it's dangerous and they don't want it on the shelves, you know, next to the cough syrup and stuff. It's that it's an expensive, long process, so that's why it's still prescription. And in terms of how you get a prescription or how you can get naloxone, in Pennsylvania, you don't need a prescription. You should be able to go to the Rite Aid or CVS down the street, walk up to that pharmacy counter, and they should be able to sell it to you because there's a standing order, meaning essentially everybody has access to it. It's, you know, a prescription that's just carte blanche that everybody should be able to get it. If you're going to do it the third-party prescribing way, you can call up your family doctor and say, hey, I have somebody in my neighborhood, in my house, in my workplace, whatever, and I want to get a prescription for naloxone. Third party, they can write the prescription in your name, and you could be using it for whoever you want to use it for.
And prescriptions are just that one dose, or do you have to keep going back and getting it?
Yeah, they should write it for 2 doses. That should be the standard for them. But in Pennsylvania, you shouldn't even need to worry about the third-party prescribing end of it unless it's a situation with, you know, insurance company or that kind of complication, because there is that standing order, so you should be able to just walk into a pharmacy and buy it. Now, I couldn't buy it. I went to one pharmacy, I couldn't buy it. I went to the other pharmacy, they would sell it to me, but they were going to sell me 1 dose, and they would sell me a needle, so. And yes?
Are there efforts to educate pharmacists on Pennsylvania's standing?
That's a good question. So I'm still a licensed pharmacist in Pennsylvania, so I do my, 30 CE credits every 2 years, and that's not one of the mandatory CE categories yet. I think it needs to be. I mean, I do mandatory education on, a couple different areas, but this is not one of them. I mean, if there's that much confusion, there needs to be a lot of education on the pharmacist level. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the effect of opioids, heroin, and
Naloxone.
on babies?
So yeah, that's not necessarily something that, I wouldn't be concerned about using naloxone on a pregnant woman because this is something that's a safe drug and it's also a life-saving drug. In terms of the effects of heroin and other opioids on pregnant women, there's definitely a concern, especially somebody who's addicted because the baby can be born opioid addicted as well.
And the follow-up question is, can addicted mothers can that cause autistic behaviors in children later years?
That I do not know, and I don't know if anybody knows that. That's a complicated question in terms of the role of opioids in these babies developing autism or autism-like symptoms later in life.
And also, it's an issue, one of my cases was because of children who are, victims of opioids, from the stage of one, are going to school. And they have to be dealt with. In schools, early intervention.
Thank you for asking. I know it's a complicated situation. Yes?
I might be confused, but you said there was a standing order for anybody in Pennsylvania to be able to go up to a pharmacist and ask for 2 doses of Naloxone. But did you say that it could cost $2,200 for 1 dose?
So $4,400 for both, yeah. If you get the Autoinjector, the fancy one that has the voice instructions. The nasal spray you can get a lot cheaper and it's easier to use.
Well, a lot cheaper meaning what?
Let's see, it's not in the thousands, I'll tell you that. Hold on one moment here.
Yeah, how many people are going to be?
Nobody's gonna buy that, and I don't know what kind of insurance would pay for that. Gone are the days where I'm involved in third-party plans, luckily, as a pharmacist. Let's see what we have price-wise here. So the vials that would be intramuscular injection would be $22 each, so $44. The needles, if you get 9 syringes, it'd be $90, so that's so like $134 for 2 doses, including needles, if you get the generic intramuscular. And those also come with, you can get the atomizer, so you can actually turn those into nasal administration too, so for less than $150. So big price difference. That's also the difference between a brand name drug, that's that MZO, that's $2,200 each dose, versus a generic. Yes?
Does the standing order include distribution of the needles? Because you said there was an issue with obtaining the needles.
Yeah, that was interesting. So if you're going to get the intramuscular vials, they can give you something that's just an atomizer, so you can actually hook it up so it can just be used up the nose type thing. I mean, technically needles are supposed to be prescriptions, so there was a little bit of confusion on that. And they were even confusing me. I'm like, well, do I get the needles or not get the needles? I need a prescription for the needles or not? Yeah. Yes?
The generic, is that a lower quality than that brand name MZO?
Nope, it's supposed to be the same quality, same efficacy. It's just that the MZO, which is the intramuscular form that has the the voice activated instructions and all that. That's just a bit of a patent, on that particular delivery system. But it's the same drug, so it's the same thing. Like if you're going to get a brand name of penicillin versus generic of penicillin, the testing is, showing that they're equivalent to what's they're used in the body. So, it's not supposed to be inferior to it though. Yes?
Does, if you just take naloxone, like methadone gets you high, right? If you just take some, you're just sitting here and or however you take it, isn't it intoxicant?
Oh, naloxone?
Yeah.
So naloxone doesn't have any agonist activity. So in other words, you need an agonist that will sit on the receptor and actually give you that high. This is an antagonist, so it does not have any effects of euphoria or pain relief or anything.
Okay.
I was thinking as you were saying that, of mentioning this as well. So I've gotten the question of, okay, well, this person swears up and down that they did not use an opioid. The only reason they came up positive on their drug screen was because they were given naloxone, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And so I found reports in literature of some people saying, you know what, it's not going to come up positive. Some of the metabolites, meaning some of the things that after the breakdown of naloxone, has some similar structure to something that would hit a drug screen. Other people saying no. So if you ever get a case like that, says, wait a second, I have a positive opioid drug screen, and this person is saying they didn't use opioids, it's from the naloxone, give a toxicologist a jingle so we can really look at what assay that laboratory used to see if it's a true positive or not a true positive. Yes?
Did you mention Suboxone at all?
I did not mention Suboxone in particular. What was your thought about Suboxone? Buprenorphine, but that's the brand name, yeah.
I do criminal laws. I represent a lot of addicts, and every once in a while, a PO will try to violate them because they have Suboxone on them. But as it's been explained to me by my clients, they take that so that they can't get high. But I don't actually understand how it works.
So, I mean, it can give them a high if they take but it's also a replacement, so it's supposed to then decrease their craving for the opioid that they're using. And then because buprenorphine has a ceiling effect to it, and with Suboxone being combined with naloxone, it's also preventing the overdose issue. So eventually they'll be able to get off the Suboxone altogether as well while they're going through their detox program. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, thank you for attending to the